Hey, all my IFG friends, this is Steve. I want to say, if you like movies like I do, we've started a new podcast called Happy Hour Flicks. You can find it anywhere podcasts are found. It's all about nostalgic movies that we love, and we bring on special guests each episode, and we also have specialty cocktails made for each one, too. So it really is an hour of a good time talking about movies that we love, like Gremlins, Seven, Free Willy. We talk about The Last Starfighter also. I mean, we kind of run the gamut across all the decades and really have a great time. So wanted to invite you to come over and join us. That's Happy Hour Flicks, anywhere podcasts are found. What do you think you could have done better, would do differently, if you could go back and do it again on this film?
Dan, do you want to start?
Oh, man. Well,
don't everybody jump up.
This is the
Independent
Filmmakers Guide
from Framework Productions.
Framework
Productions.
On IFG, we talk about independent film from development through delivery. By featuring discussions with creators and collaborators about their experiences, we form a roadmap to help you have the most success with your projects.
It's easy to think new filmmakers arrive on the scene out of nowhere, creating their first feature success overnight. The truth is, filmmaking is born out of experience. Today, we speak with the producer and director duo who took the years of lessons learned from commercial work and relayed that into their first feature film, The Ghost Who Walks.
We went into production with about a third of the money raised that we had hoped to for the budget. But like Cody was talking about, there was a version of this that was him and I in the cast and a camera.
That's Dan Gardner, producer for the film The Ghost Who Walks.
I wanted to make a film that was accessible and that could speak to people that, maybe don't consider themselves art house film people, but are totally capable of the depth that comes with those types of projects.
And that's Cody Stokes, director and co-writer.
At the time, why I was so adamant on making that as my first feature is I had done a lot of work with a lot of other filmmakers in the indie film space, and that ranged from really small micro budget features to things with like a modest budget. And when I say modest, I'm talking in the low hundreds or whatever, hundreds of thousands, which is not much money at all. But there was something there to work with.
I'm your host, Stephen Pierce,
and I was working mostly as a DP and as an editor on those projects, and definitely had scratched that itch in terms of just getting lean and mean work done. And there's a lot to be said about that, especially for your first film and especially for the sake of making films in general. But for me, doing all that and then subsequently during that time doing all the commercial work that Dan and I do together, it was really clear that the films that I'm interested in making from a creative standpoint as a storyteller, they're not going to fit in that world. And so then it became about, okay, whatever we're going to do first is not going to be easy no matter what. But this movie, despite all of the locations and all of the people involved, it was the most grounded in a world that was achievable, I think, from the sense of, at the very least, at the worst case scenario, the two of us were prepared to just hit the streets with a camera and make it if it was just the two of us. And we knew because it was a movie in actual space. We weren't trying to, create a world that didn't exist around us. We could pull it off that way. And so of all the ideas I was kind of cooking up, that was the most grounded. And I think that was how we got into it. Whether that was truly, well advised or not is debatable, but that was how we got to where we got.
So what is Ghost Who Walks about?
The Ghost Who Walks is about fatherhood thematically. It's a story we've seen a lot, right? Guy gets out of prison trying to re-find his family, connect with them, and get him out of Dodge. And I really intentionally wanted to take a story that was so familiar and so obvious because I wanted to take these elements of genre and I wanted to take something that did feel familiar to an audience. And then I wanted to work within that to make it different and to change things. I really wanted to, I grew up really loving pretty obscure cinema, a lot of European stuff. And I still do love all that. But I also, as I aged and as I got older and as I worked on a lot of pretty obscure things too, it reminded me as a filmmaker of like why I got into this. And I got into this through pretty big budget movies. I didn't have necessarily the access some people have to certain types of film. And I remembered, like, okay, first and foremost, the art form we work in started as a commerce-based thing. It's entertainment. And for me, I think there's a lot of stuff I love that's outside of that exact purview, but it also, that's a point of privilege for a lot of people. And I knew I wanted to make a film that was accessible and that could speak to people that, you know, maybe don't consider themselves art house film people, but are totally capable of the depth that comes with those types of projects. So I set it in that, you know, that crime thriller world. And then within that, use that as a way to examine themes that I wanted to examine. And then also just, I don't want to say we subverted the genre, but we definitely took a lot of liberties within the genre itself in terms of how we got down the road.
So, and you guys worked together quite a bit, like before even Ghost. So was it just a given that you were going to do this film together, or Dan, how did you get involved?
Yeah, so I've been, let's see, at some point was producing commercials with Cody in New York. And I think that's when he kind of had the genesis for this script. And I had, you know, produced short films for him, some music video stuff as well. And, you know, when it, you know, became a fully fledged idea, I think in his head, I happened to probably be standing next to him and, you know, let's make this thing. And from there kind of started the process. You know, had a couple of rough starts in that and then figured out a way to do it the way that we wanted to, I think, or at least the way we knew we could get it done, a way that we'd be happy with.
Whenever you decided, okay, here we're doing it, like press and go, we're making the movie. What steps were you going? Were you going to raise the funding, like the capital traditionally, like through equity? Were you going to try and get grants? Like, what was your plan? From the beginning, I think, you know, we knew that this was, you know, it's a first-time director. You know, we had worked with an executive producer in New York who was set up originally to, you know, kind of help us along the way and be a part of it. And just at some point we couldn't get things moving in the right way. And we had hit several, it's a Christmas movie. And so building into our design of how to shoot it and get the most that we could out of what existed, we were going to shoot it during Christmas time, get advantage of the decorations, the weather, all of that. And we kind of kept hitting that season and not being able to go with it. So got to a certain point where we kind of looked at each other and said, well, this isn't really moving this way. What's a better way that we can just make sure that we can get this done? I mean, it's coming up. Let's maybe part ways and then figure out a way to do it on our own. And so from that point, took it out of New York, moved it back to St. Louis, and then started doing a raise locally, all private equity, worked with an executive producer here, David Johnson, who had done some development work previously and was in the world and kind of knew the right people to start talking to. And then from there, it kind of started happening pretty quickly. Obviously, we went into production with about a third of the money raised that we had hoped to for the budget. But like Cody was talking about, there was a version of this that was him and I and the cast and a camera. So just knowing that along the way, we were able to kind of tier in how we were going to start and what we were going to be able to do. And luckily throughout the production, as things got going and people kind of saw what we were doing, it got easier to start raising that additional money. So it even, you know, by our last week of shooting, which we'd kind of scheduled all of our big stunt pieces and those big set pieces towards the end, we were in a better financial position by the time we got to those to be able to actually scale them up a bit. Right. I mean, I think you guys are in a unique situation too, because the different than some of the other films that I talk to is because you guys are both DP directors. You're both very good at that. Was that giving you the comfort that you're like, you know what, the hell with it? Like if, you know, Dan's going to put the camera on his shoulder, I'll look over and I'll look at the monitor on top of the camera and we can still make something great. We had a long track record of making things with either just the two of us or a limited crew to where we knew we weren't, you know, it wouldn't have been the same film it is now, but we knew we were going to be able to make something that represented the story we were trying to tell. And I think that goes to, I mean, so, you know, Dan was being slightly modest. In my opinion, it was de facto Dan was going to make the film. I don't do things without Dan. And that goes for commercials and films at this point. Like I really work hard to work together as a team. And, you know, of course,
there's times where he's worked with other people and so have I, but it's my most comfortable position as a director is when I have people around me who understand what I'm going for and are champions of those ideas and who can add to those ideas. And I think Dan and I first met, a long time ago now, when we were pretty young. And at the time, Dan, like you said, he was doing a lot of other things. He wasn't producing when we first met. He was a gaffer and a DP and did a lot of those things. And that brings a lot of weight and a lot of skill to our relationship. And like I said, I was editing and shooting as well. So we were pretty confident that if push came to shove, we would be able to pull it off how we wanted to.
While you were developing your shot lists and trying to execute all of that, was that changing as the scope was shifting, or were you always kind of had the same visual consistency? It was just going to be the amount of production design, wardrobe, cast, other little bells and whistles to like make it bigger.
We always knew we weren't going to have the budget to light up a lot of exteriors, things like that. So a lot of that was location dependent, was choices of when and how we shot those things. And what really did scale, to your point, is the production design, is the lighting package and all those things. But where we chose to focus our efforts, like from a technical standpoint with that, was in the camera and in the lensing, knowing we weren't going to have control of some of the other things, so that we were getting this consistent look and style and feel while we were still adapting to kind of the ever-changing world, whether that was, a location having to change or compromise, or, just not having the money to do certain things production design-wise that we might have wanted to.
And St. Louis definitely was a help, right? Because you guys both are like, you're based from St. Louis. You probably had a lot of resources and things you could pull on for a first-time film that normally you'd have to, pay for, or really pull some extra, to have some extra money on hand.
Yeah. It was just coming from a place where I'd been in the scene for a long time, both in kind of the independent world, and then also kind of, being a part of the crews that had done some of the bigger pictures that came through. Just having that network there to be able to, even if it's just like calling someone for, hey, do you know someone who has this thing or whatever? That said, I mean, both our investors, which were all local and none of which had invested in a film before, were just so supportive, both with, investing in the first place, but also, being like, hey, I might know someone who has this thing. I can help you guys get into this spot. I've got some pull over here. And then just kind of the city in general was really excited about it, kind of opened their doors pretty much to it. And that makes it so much easier. And then also just being able to go home at night is a nice bit to filmmaking that I think sometimes we don't get.
So you went into production with a third of the funding you wanted. Did you end up having to take on finishing funds, or how did you end up wrapping everything up from a financial standpoint?
So by the time we hit our final week of shooting, we knew that we could complete and kind of deliver a master for what we kind of had in hand. So from that point, I mean, it was still, when you're talking business model, we still hadn't, raised our total amount. So we were just able to kind of keep going without changing the deal or anything like that. And then, so that took us through post, got us there. And then just lining up some of the final licensing, music, things like that to do the actual delivery to our distributor, was a little bit extra, and, people happily kind of hopped in and said, cool. And, we still landed below that kind of total target number, which was, it's a nice to be able to go into the marketplace, not being kind of maxed out already.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure. Who did where was the post finishing done? Did you have like a house particularly that you knew do the color?
We did sound in Dallas with Johnny Marshall. Cody did the initial edit in his basement. We took the fine cut out to LA to Nick Gartner, who did a kind of polish and pass on it. Color came out of LA as well, through a guy that we've worked with in commercials. There's 46 visual effects shots in the movie, none of which are, major things, but like little cleanup here and there, some, bullet hits, things like that. and both through kind of Mike Kearns, Patrick Vaughn, some people that we work with regularly commercially, and then also like a team that we put together of people who jumped in and said, yeah, I want to help out and do what I can. Here's what I know how to do. Team of 4 or 5 people that were really able to just knock out a shot here and there. So it was pretty much scrapped together, much like some of the production as well.
So Brandon Chavez is the name of the color artist who we worked with on this. He's someone that I had done a number of commercials with. And I mean, we really just got along because we always put way more grain on spots than we'd end up getting to have in the end. And so we just kind of hit it off there.
There's a lot of like chases, there's guns, there's cars, there's a lot of stunts and like kind of, practical effects that could be pretty dangerous. How did you approach doing that on an independent, setting like this?
It started in casting, right? Like really making sure that the people were not only great actors, but physically up for the challenge. I mean, this was a really, really grueling film to shoot, especially for Garland, our lead who played Nolan, and several other people too. But I mean, he's in every scene, and if he's not running, he's fighting. And if he's not fighting, he's doing something else. From an actor standpoint, that's really hard. And so that was first consideration. And then we had, a really, Dan was able to bring on a really great stunt coordinator named Brian Peters, who was really enthusiastic and really excited about pushing, what we could get to happen on camera with the budget, the time we had, and the stunt team we had, but always still being safe. And so then the third consideration is, once you had that conversation, is if something had to amend or change, okay, how are we lensing this? How are we going to shoot this? For me, the movie is about someone running out of time. And so time was a really big factor in considering how to shoot. One of the main rules on set was, even though every scene was storyboarded and there's a plan for how to cover it and edit it if you wanted to, if a shot could continue, the rule was we want to continue that. The longer anything can play in a single take, the better it is for the scene. And it kind of really came on the back of, can Garland pull it off physically over and over again? And then also our crew, right? Like everywhere he's moving, the camera's moving.
How many cameras did you use? One camera? What kind of lenses? And was there a reason for picking those?
Yeah. So we used an Alexa Mini for our camera. We thankfully were able to get 2 bodies. So, having a background as a DP and an editor, I know what I need very, very specifically. And I also, shooting as many commercials, I know how to just run a set and try to keep on time. And we had a really ambitious workload for the crew the time we had. So whenever we could, I would utilize dual cameras. And so we had 2 camera bodies, but we were sharing one set of lenses. And they were, Kawa anamorphic lenses. These really, really nice vintage lenses that have a lot of character.
Mm-hmm,
and,
definitely.
Not necessarily something you shoot with lightly. It's a commitment for sure. And it's very technically challenging. I mean, there's parts of those lenses that will just never be in focus, and you just have to be okay with that. But it was really intentional to choose those because that brought a look to the world that we could control all the time, no matter what was on the other side of the lens. And so we shot the whole movie. We had a set of 4 lenses, and we ended up shooting on 3 of them for the whole thing. But one of the things we care a lot about with the people we work with is the tone of their personality on set. What could make a difference in a really good project or versus something that falls apart when going gets tough is the people you have around you. And I think especially keys, I mean, it's their job to kind of keep the right demeanor. And so, and that's, we apply that to both filmmaking and commercial. And so, we were doing this shoot years ago now out in LA, and that's when Dan brought Michael on. And I first met him, and we had just kind of, the 3 of us are good friends, and we'd worked together a lot on these commercials. And, much like I knew however this went, Dan and I would be right next to each other. Over the years, the more we talked to Michael, the more he heard about the project and was interested. He became that kind of third person. The other thing about it is, the kind of ethos of this film is what's the most creative choice you can make within the limitations you have. And so part of that was budgetary, right? Or just logistical. But then part of that is, okay, as creators, as artists, what are the limitations we impose upon ourselves? And so when talking about lensing, like I said, if a shot can continue, how and why, and let's do that. And then also we set rules about certain lighting, certain color that will always be in scene. So knowing that we can't control certain elements, we can control these few things that are our must-haves. So it was really about setting that simple playbook and just following through relentlessly. And there was times where we were in scenes and we're like, no, we want to do this a different way. And then we'd say, yeah, but what's the rules?
Not getting seduced by like the momentary, like, oh, this would be really beautiful if we did this, or if we did this, that'd be very cool and interesting or technical, but rather, how does that flow in the scene? How does that flow in the story?
It's also about knowing what comes next. And I think my background as an editor really helped a lot with that, of knowing how am I getting in and out of these scenes very specifically, why, and how is it going to feel, or even how long does a shot need to sit, right? After you've supposedly cut, like what else is there to be seen? So we're in a business of storytelling, and I think too often the people who actually made things, they don't want to talk about the truth of what it took to make it. They want to talk about what they think they should be presented as. And it makes me so angry because we're doing such a disservice to younger people coming up into the business because they don't hear those sides of things. They don't think about that. And I think for me, it's like, I mean, at this point, I don't know the exact number, but I know collectively Dan and I have made just over 100 commercials at this point, plus all the short films, plus all the films we worked on with other people. It took that many things to make our first low budget movie. I mean, so to think that people just inherently know how to do things, I think is one of the greatest lies ever told.
What do you think you could have done better, would do differently if you could go back and do it again on this film?
Say no more early. And that's not, Cody and I had a lot of conversations kind of going in about, again, those limitations and what we were really able to do. I mean, there was a point in time where we wanted there to be snow and, a very wintry feel the whole time. And then it gets into it and the budget's kind of moving around and all that. And you have to have the hard conversation of like, look, I can give you snow in one scene. Like, I need you to pick that scene and I'll make it happen. But like, that's all the money we have for snow in this. It also happened to be like one of the warmest Decembers because we shot between Thanksgiving and Christmas. It happened to be one of the warmer Decembers that we've had. So there wasn't any natural precipitation anyway.
Which ultimately might have been a blessing, because if you were running and moving that quickly and you had snow and now you have continuity issues or you have to melt snow.
The simplest thing is when you're making a project, no matter how big or small, your job is to make the best choice with the given circumstances. And so it's not about thinking about what could have been, what should have been, what you would like it to be. It's about going, okay, this is the reality. This is the ground truth of what we're dealing with. What is the very best and most creative way to deal with that? At the end of the day, the worst thing you could do is not make a decision and not move forward. And so I think that is kind of the overall simplest takeaway. And that's scalable, right? No matter how big your budget or how small your budget is, from a directing standpoint or from a producing standpoint or even from a writing standpoint, like, make decisions, right? There's not room for ambiguity. There's too many people involved in this to let you just kind of sit and get ethereal about it. Like, you have to choose, you have to move forward, and you have to keep making stuff. And I think that especially since this is an artistic craft, but I think it's a craft first. And sometimes people forget that and they want to get caught up in the artistry of it. And while that's good and fine, if you can't just build the wall, you're never going to have a house, right? And so who cares what color is painted at that point? And then just choosing and continuing to move and trusting your people too. I think it's not just choices, hey, is that take good or not? It's, hey, is this crew person the right person? Maybe they're not as experienced as we would have wanted, but they have the passion we want. Trust that. Enable them, allow them to come and do the job you asked them to do, and then celebrate them for that. But also, if it's not working, you just got to tell them, not in a way that's about ego or anything else, but people want to do what if you let them know what you're looking for, they want to deliver that. And that's the kind of the biggest takeaway is like, just don't back away from that. That's your job. That's the end of it.
How long was your production schedule? And was there any major sticking points when you hit starting roll on day one that you still didn't have sorted out for the last day?
We had a 20-day schedule, 4 weeks of 5 days. Went out and shot kind of B-roll pickups kind of for those 3 weekends in between. On day one of shooting, like, we did not have all of our locations locked. There was still a question about kind of the big getaway scene and kind of what would be done. So it definitely was, the whole thing was a swirling kind of moving puzzle kind of the entire way. little victories along the way, but also like just constantly setting up the next day's work. I mean, it was 12-hour, 14-hour shooting days plus 4 hours prep on the beginning side of it and 4 hours wrap on the back side of it kind of each day. So it was definitely a month without sleep.
How many crew members did you have, like specifically on the camera side? Like cast, we know how many you had, but what was your crew like?
It's a camera team of 4, and then it was pretty standard small crew size. DP, second camera for most of the run, first, second, DIT, keys +2 pretty much on the lighting side of things. I think sometimes we scaled down to just kind of 2 and 2. And then for some of the scenes also scaled up to have, maybe like 4 and 4, but it was a pretty tight, small crew. So
let's talk a little bit about your edit. Like you finished a rough cut and then you took it in a fine cut editor. Why?
Well, 2 things. One is, perspective is always good. And so Nick Gardner, who's actually Dan's brother, is someone who I go way back with as well. And he's a really good editor living out in LA. And it was kind of one of those things where, there's just certain people, have strong suits that fill in the gaps where you are. So I had, there was some assistant editors in terms of helping us prep it, but there was not like I wouldn't call like a proper assistant editor who was with the project the whole time. There was a lot of really helpful people who you just kind of help trim down certain scenes. But now let's let me get out of the way and let someone else just like see what the fat feels like. And Nick, that's kind of, I think, one of his greatest strong suits, and especially in some of the action sequences, he's able to bring things to life in a way that I at the time I just wasn't, right? I was worried about character and these other things. And I was just like, hey, go do what you can do and bring it back. And then we'll converse about that. So just having a fresh set, someone to come in and argue with you. And I never in a combative way, but we argued about a lot of things because he would cut scenes and I'd be like, what are you doing? So what happened is he did a really good first cut and we knew it was still long. And I knew I wanted to bring some moments back in. So then I flew out to LA and stayed with him for about 2 weeks. And we sat literally side by side and would kind of just switch off trying things out. And that was kind of around the clock for 2 weeks.
So I'm assuming whenever you were shooting, you're like, okay, this is here and then we can cut to this and this is the coverage and this is that. How much of that were you surprised by? Like, and how much of that actually stayed the way you imagined it on set?
Most of it. So we went into this with about 1,400 boards drawn. So there was not a lot of accidental anything. Now those boards were drawn before the exact locations were there. So there was definitely like modifications on set, of course, but often on set, I would know like, okay, if I have to cut this down or or if we're running short of time or like I can't get this angle, I would literally be just tearing boards out and like redoing the edit on paper right there. So I knew that as I was covering things, I was covering them properly for an edit. So by the time I got to the edit room, we certainly cut down, on things, but there was nothing that felt like a discovery in terms of we hadn't thought about how this would fit into it. And I think that just really speaks to how fast we were moving and how kind of essential it was. I mean, one of the parts of the film that I think talking about things you could redo if you could, there's this kind of chase scene once he at the end, he's trying to get away and there's this big chase sequence. And we had something very specific planned out and boarded. And for a number of reasons, mostly logistics and money, we could not do that scene that way. And that's where, Dan and I really had to scrap and lean. We both have documentary backgrounds as well, which came in really handy. I don't like to rely on that as just like a go-to, like, we'll figure it out. But when the going gets tough, knowing like, okay, I know how to bring things to life on the fly. That's one of the scenes that was more of I would say a discovery in the edit than a foregone conclusion. But everything else was relatively true to boards other than the small things we had to do to change within the locations.
So now the film's done. And what do you do with it? You have an indie film, sitting on a hard drive somewhere. And what was your plan and what did you do?
We knew kind of from the start that we were going to submit it to US in Progress, which is a great festival There's 2 of them kind of year round. Check it out. It's really great. And so we had submitted a rough cut to that, gotten in, and then did really well and ended up winning that festival section for that, which really helped give us at least a little bit of kind of press and PR moving into then our other festival kind of run. It put us on the map with a couple people, and that really helped us along the way. Then kind of hit up our, the big 5 festival wise. And then we were kind of, the worst time is kind of in between that submission and just waiting to hear back. And so that's like literally like 4 or 5 months of time of just kind of like sitting, waiting, trying to figure out how much to plan. Well, okay, if we make this plan, it's all going to change anyway. What do we do? So kind of during that time, we kind of started talking about like, okay, here's really our distribution options. Here's what we would be looking at. Here's where we want to target. Here's where we want to go. And so by the time that we kind of realized that we weren't going to hit any of those big top 5, we already had a plan in place to reach out to our producers rep, to our distributors and that sort of thing. We ended up signing with Gravitas for our North American distribution. And they were really supportive of kind of the schedules we were looking at of trying to release around Christmas to take advantage of kind of the thematic elements. And so from there, they took it transactional and then put it on Netflix. So we released on Netflix kind of right as the pandemic kind of was kicking off, and launched really well. Was on the top 10 for a couple of weeks there, and it seems to be performing pretty strongly still.
That's great. So international sales, are you selling those with another
ongoing
distributor?
Yeah, we've got an international sales rep doing that, and that's kind of ongoing. We're starting to hear back on some of those things. Obviously, that was kicking off right as kind of everything started locking down. So I know they're a little slower to it, but it sounds like they're going to be picking up and trying to place it for the Christmas holiday as well.
And so you found a lot of those deals through US in Progress, like initially, those initial contacts, or did they come through somewhere else?
They'd heard about us from that, so it made it easier to kind of get in there and have those conversations.
Gotcha.
And that was just good to, there's a lot of distributors and reps and people there that will give you a very like baseline, like, hey, here's where your movie is going to play. Here's where it's not going to play. Here's where it's looking good. Here's something you might want to think about changing. And here's the realities of the market. So that was a really good thing to hear early on and be kind of ready to move with. But yeah.
So if people wanted to find The Ghost Who Walks and you guys to follow you all, where would they find you?
www.theghostwhowalksmovie.com. You can find us on Facebook, The Ghost Who Walks Movie. They can find us on Instagram, The Ghost Who Walks Movie. You can find us on Twitter as well, @__Ghost Who Walks. Cody is at CodyStokes.com. You can check out all his commercial stuff as well, short films, all the other stuff that we're doing. He and I are kicking off our company kind of this year, 3 Letters. That website is not up yet, but will be shortly. And yeah.
All right, man. That makes me excited. I wanna go shoot a film, to be honest.
For serious, man, like made me inspired. I really want to be filming right now. Like I love the tenacity of, if it's just gonna be he and I and an iPhone, we're gonna do it, and then building the community around that and kind of building up the ramp. That was cool.
And speaking to community specifically, filming it, writing your project and planning your project with what you have available to you in mind. For them, the city, St. Louis, they said they had so many connections and friends and family and, people that can help them just in general, whether it's mostly with the locations, but also with other resources as well. I mean, I think that's so smart.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've known Dan and Cody for a long time, actually, and they're like quintessential, like, good filmmakers. I mean, they said themselves, they made over 100 commercials. I mean, they're super legit, like very, very good. I DP'd something years ago for GQ magazine that Dan Gardner was the gaffer on. So it was really funny to me whenever he popped up as like producing this movie. But now, like, talking to him now, I'm like, wow, he's like, it seems like he's really got it together. Like, they really ran a tight ship. It was a great production, and they understand not only how to make things, work, but how to make it work the best way possible.
And, it comes out of experience. Like you said, I love what Cody said about, working on over, something like 100 projects before they made their first feature. And I love, he went even further to say, this idea so many people see like, oh, this new filmmaker just came out, they're brand new, everyone does this, whether it's a new actor who's big or a new director who's big or a writer. Everyone always has this story and tendency to start painting this idea of this person who came out of nowhere and they're brand new and they have this amazing work, and I love that.
And it's earned.
Yeah, that work comes from all these other projects and from experience working in commercials and whatever else, paid work usually.
I mean, I think that, editors constantly get the short end of the stick when it comes to directing, I think. Like a lot of times they're not viewed as they're going to be as strong as directors. Personally, I think my background in editing makes me a better director because I understand I've been given so many things that shouldn't work, didn't work, and you have to figure out how to put it together. And I think that you see that, I think, too, in The Ghost Who Walks. It's really executed well. It looks like, they didn't have a very big budget, and it looks way bigger.
Looks good.
Like it looked, the pace overall is very strong. I mean, it just is very well executed. You'd think that they spent a lot more money than they did, not to discount what they did spend, but that's experience. That's what that is.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, when I watched it too, it just the frames and the lighting look so good.
And consistent. It has a look. Not all films have a look. Definitely not all indie films have a look, but that film has a look.
And there's a lot of action in it, on a small budget, like you talked about a lot. That's not easy to pull off.
No, not at all. 20-day schedule. So they actually had a pretty good schedule, but to pull, that's, I think, just good producing. And again, I'm seeing a pattern of 1 and 1 plus 2, for Genie Crew. I don't know why that's so evasive, but it was so hard to find that information when we were starting to try and produce our stuff is like, what does a typical indie, Genie Crew look like? And a camera crew, DP, second camera, first assistant, second assistant. That's like camera department, Genie. 3, 1 and 1, or the keys plus 2, right?
Keys plus 2, yeah.
Keys. There you go. Now there's a guideline. Now we understand what a baseline is for something that can be made that's good, and now you can work around that as like a template.
And then just like everyone else, go work as hard as you possibly can, make the thing with the resources you have, and build up the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the relationship, you can't discount a relationship. I think that's probably the thing that's at the core of what they both were saying is the mutual respect they have for each other, the way they work together, and the way they not insist, but they build each other up. And that I think that relationship really makes their work and their longevity more apparent.
Well, we're going to get there with our relationship. We're just starting out still.
We're working on it. Yeah, we're still working on that relationship.
Well, also Christmas movie. So now we have another Christmas movie to add on to like Die Hard and Gremlins to watch during the holidays.
So if you're tired of watching, Die Hard, you've had enough of Bruce Willis in buildings. Now this Christmas, watch The Ghost Who Walks.
Filmmaking is a collaborative experience, and so is this podcast. Follow us on Instagram at framework_productions for upcoming episode announcements, and leave your questions in the comments for our future guests. The first 10 to comment are immediately entered to win a monthly prize. Please take a second to subscribe so you know about future episodes, and leave a review. It really does help us. For more information about today's guest, visit independentfilmmakersguide.com to see visuals, diagrams, and to see links to the episode in video and article form. IFG is a community, and we want to help you in your filmmaking process.
Hey, my name is Stephen Wester. I'm a gaffer from Chicago, Illinois, and I'm reading the credits. IFG is produced by Framework Productions and is directed by James Allardyce. It's produced by Matt Mundy, edited by Audrey Ray McHale, and hosted by Stephen Pierce. The music is by Glassboy. Find his music on freemusicarchive.org. Thanks for listening.
Hey friends, we just wanted to take a quick moment to talk about 2 personal things. First, we wanted to thank you, our listening community, and our wonderful guests, learning so much together along the way and continuing to learn, sharing our stories, making a lot of new friends, and collaborating, which is exactly what this is all about. Which also brings me to my second point. In great part to many of these new relationships, we wanted to let you know that we've taken a lot of this advice ourselves and made our own narrative feature film, Herd. H-E-R-D, Herd, which is premiering this October on Friday the 13th in select theaters as well as on VOD. Personally, I think it's the perfect kind of scary movie to watch during our favorite scary season. So we'd love for you to celebrate with us and watch Herd. You can pre-order it on Apple TV, and of course, do the communal thing, see it in theaters. Of course, for all of this, please see our show notes, but basically, we're going to keep it all updated at herd.film. That's herd.film, herd.film as well. Thank you again, and be sure to give us a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts so we can continue to build this community and collaborate. IFG, how movies get made.